Hi, welcome back. You are very aware that I'm having maybe the first of a series of interviews with Mr. Tom Dunlay, one of the Gammell students from back in the day. I'd love to have a couple of the other ones at some point. But I wanted to, before we start, I just wanted to make sure I've thanked several of you. I think we have about maybe as many as a dozen donations to name, and I'm trying to use like four per, say the names of four people per. So I wanted to just today thank Anthony R., Adra B., Lucas C., and Benjamin C. And both the last two guys I've been talking to in person. You know who you are. I know who you are. And so thank you all, you guys, very much for making this an ongoing success for Mr. Producer to to be encouraged enough to keep wanting to help out. Anyway, all right. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Excellent, Paul. How are you? Good to be
Right.
back.
Yeah, it's nice to be back. Yeah, it looks like
Yeah.
your camera's a little more controlled this time.
eh, eh,
I got to comment
we
about things like this.
recognize
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
Excellent.
Yeah, I have. I I don't have really any idea where we left off, and I thought we should do. And to the viewer, I'm going to say that we're trying to do maybe as many as a 45 minute, several 45 minute um, conversations between Tom and I. I don't want to call these interviews anymore. Just a conversation with some former Gammell students who happen to be in the Gammell studios at the same time. It would be always be lovely to have a Robert Douglas Hunter or somebody else, a lack, from back in the old days for an interview. But this is us just talking to each other and reflecting, and I'm hoping it's some good comes out of it. I mean, both of us are serious craftsmen, so I think for your sake, I think I'm talking to you, the viewer. I think you will find it some benefit. I don't mean to just be self-indulgent, and Tom, I don't think is inclined to be that way either. So, all right,
Well,
Tom, yeah,
good
yeah,
conversation always promotes good memory. So it's fun to talk about it, and
yeah.
I'm sure we'll remember some things that we overlooked the last time.
Tom, I woke up. I woke up. I've mentioned it to my students recently. I woke up with a nightmare with Gammel in it. Uh, it was just 2 or 3 nights ago, mornings ago. Serious case of indigestion. It was very funny. I mean, but I mean, there are things about Gammel. He was in and as it were, class by himself. We were all, middle class kids. Gammel was up there in this Brahmin world.
Right.
What formerly what they slave traders and all kinds. Who knows what other stuff they did?
Rum,
Bankers and
cotton.
what's that?
Rum, slaves, and cotton.
Yeah, yeah, and then the interesting side of it, right? And then hearing the stories about his family having stolen a textile, yeah, design for a textile creation, creating certain kinds of fabrics. But nevertheless, that's how you get to be Brahmins in this world, huh?
Exactly.
But
It
in
was,
any case, I was very sorry. Yep.
no, it was serious business back then
Yeah.
when those families were building their fortunes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so you could say, well, we had rather an elevated view of him, but based on where he is now, not things his family might have done back then.
Well, what was interesting was that he lived in that world and he was from that world
Hmm.
certainly,
Hmm.
but the world of being a painter, was far more important to him than being a Brahmin or
Yeah.
reflecting the lifestyle of the rich family that he came from.
Oh, no question.
He
Yeah.
was a workaday painter.
Yeah.
He he took it seriously. He put his time in. He was not a dilettante
No.
in any.
No. And what I would say is that what he brought to it was an elevated sense of things that does come from his culture, and with that world, well educated, well read, uh, that whole thing is frankly, in this generation, we've been seriously deprived of that kind of an education. And, I know that today you couldn't get a college education as good as what he got going through Groton, that private
I mean,
school.
graduating from Groton, you were as educated as you needed to be to go on and pursue something at a place like Harvard was simply to go into a special field of study.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he remarkably well educated. I mean, extraordinary.
Yeah. And then he continued trying not only to read among other things, teach himself a new word every day.
Yeah,
Uh,
he was. I remember the stack of index cards, 3 or 4 inches high of new words that he was planning on learning. He would learn one every day and try to incorporate his conversation,
yeah,
uh, using it as much as he could.
yeah, and he was trying to get us to do likewise, so to speak. And so that's what I'm talking about. This being this kind of remarkable benefit that we didn't have any inclination, any inkling of from our middle class backgrounds. I mean, my dad was a postal clerk, and eventually a
Yeah,
little better than that management level, but he
yeah.
still was.
It
Yeah,
was the same. He worked in a factory, and
yeah, yeah,
he did go into management, but he was an ordinary worker,
yeah,
ordinary back.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But it was there were reasons we were, you could call it intimidating, but it wasn't. It was just elevating, and it was in fact it was maybe intimidating in the sense of being in rarefied air. You know what I mean? You knew you were in the presence of somebody special, but it was significantly because of course because of his work. But then it was also his writing, which is all in front of us. He had written the first book in 1947 or so, 43
40,
somewhere in there. Was it
yeah.
47? Yeah.
Twilight, right?
Yeah, and then he continued to write, and I remember laughingly after correcting his grammar or his punctuation in one of those essays he gave us, getting a good laugh out of him. And I'm saying, "Oh, it's not exactly what I gave it to you for." And I mean, I wasn't pretending to be that. I just didn't know what else. Except, of course, it was just fantastic to have him his freshest thinking, And if you think you're with a teacher if you're with a teacher who's not growing and continually improving his knowledge base and his mind, you do well to think that through.
Exactly. No, that's what I found most interesting and most profound about study. It was not just a classroom or studio situation where he came in and dispensed criticism.
Right.
Uh, he was interested in your overall education. I mean, he would send us to the opera, to the ballet, to the symphony,
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
any opportunity to, improve our experiences. It might have some impact on our own temperaments and personalities.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Now it was a rare blessing. I just want to say it that way. But your introduction to him, you do have a sense of the rarefied air because of the writing, because of the Twilight of Painting. And I remember being in the presence of people in New York who were elite painters in their time and day, who would decry the idea of you reading anything, and especially reading anything about painting. God help
Mm-hmm.
you. And but yeah, what a difference! Although it was also true that he said to me, "You're the first person who's ever asked me for a reading list." you know, not to put you on the spot. You probably already had the books in front of you. You knew what to read with because you were already there. But
No, but
I
remember.
was in the chance of not being able to study with him, and I really wanted to know what I should be reading.
Right. I remember being so impressed with his library, the student library,
Right.
his own personal library, that the day I started studying with him, I started a regular pattern of hounding the used bookshops in Boston, trying to
Yeah.
duplicate and it's proved to be one of the most valuable things that I have in terms of being able to help students, give them the right things to read, books on painting by painters.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was an extraordinary part of our education with him.
Yeah.
The right information
Yeah.
by the right.
Yeah. He said, I remember setting us up with Leonardo as a starting point, and that was the only book I remember him saying. I mean, he had other books in the list. Was it Will Lowe, Chronicles of Friendship?
Will Hickok Lowe, yeah.
Yeah, and a few others like that. But I remember him pointing out that we needed to be reading Leonardo, the treatise on painting. And then he said McCurdy is the best read, and I started reading it. It was this book. That book, however wide it was, had a little section on the treatise on painting. And here I was reading this stuff thinking, man, he's crazy if he thinks I'm going to keep reading this. And finally, I got a little smart and I started reading the table of contents and found the treatise on painting portion of it. But there's where that reference was that you provided nicely to me when you first met me about the line of shadow. And he was just very intent on having you know what good painters had said. He would say, borrow from a millionaire. He wanted you to know what good painters had said about painting.
Mm-hmm.
It was obvious they were good painters, but their
Exactly.
words. Yeah.
Oh, and Harold Speed, Kenyon Cox. I mean, those were the daily reads that he quoted from all the time. Um,
Actually, I,
common sense painting.
yeah. Well, I just happened to have read yesterday. I was sitting there waiting for some students to finish with whatever they were doing, and the book, Speed's book, was sitting in front of me. And I started reading the introduction. I thought, Paul, you almost never read introductions, or used to in those days. And I eventually found out the introductions were frequently one of the most important parts of books, but because there's so much summary information frequently and,
Right.
and rationale.
And
But
what he hopes to achieve in the book.
yeah, but that was if I did read it back in the day, and it was definitely a Gammell Shells, it sounds, Speed's interpretation of the beauty and truth one that so patently belongs to anger, and but that and the whole general sense of our form and what it's all about was just summed up in a very very effective way in layman's terms in the front of that book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but it was always that misconception out there about just look at pictures, don't read books. But I always think of it as being, and I don't know if he used that term. It's a table that needs at least three legs. And the conversation of painters is definitely shop talk, what he called it.
Exactly. Yeah. The shop talk of painters. I mean, as he said, the real history of painting is the history of studio gossip. What the painters said. What
Yeah,
they thought.
yeah.
Not where they had lunch or where they took the train to summer afternoon or what type of style they adopted.
Hey, Rothenstein was definitely no shirker when it came to where lunch was. You remember The Men in Memories is a significant read that everybody should have their hands on. I mean, he was in love with his own generation, which we look back on him and think what losers they were. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but they just he gives so many indications of these guys being so full of themselves in different ways. But he does a real mea culpa himself when he's working with Sargent and talking about that experience and and how he failed to grasp in his youth the value of another painter right next to him who had that
Mm-hmm.
capacity. But anyway, it has that, but it has much more than that. So it has these relationships with Degas that went on for significant parts of his life with Whistler, with a lot of people, and one could that was definitely right up front in Gammell's conversation about where you wanted to get information about painters. Rothenstein was an educated painter,
Mm-hmm.
even though it wasn't it was a time of craziness and shifting sands in our world. But yeah,
It was. It was a unique time, an unusual time. So much was happening, and the whole idea of what painting is was shifting. From beauty to expression, and that was what killed it essentially. The
yeah,
idea of being expressive in one's work as opposed to simply showing the truth of nature, the beauty of nature,
yeah.
and the idea of whatever you had to say would come out if you were a consummate workman and had the goal of beauty.
Yeah. Well, the point made by Speed was reinforced by Gammell, and that is that you need to be in pursuit of the truth. You'll find beauty, but you must find it at the source of being learning how to draw what you see sitting in front of you, humbly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. One is always influenced by others, but one ought not to attempt to imitate others
Right.
in their pursuit. Nature should be the foundation.
Right.
It has of all the great art, since painting first began.
The one thing that Gammell gave me, us probably, but I won't put words in your mouth. The difference was that in New York, the body of knowledge, whatever they had and all that sort of stuff, the whole spirit was you're on your own. With Gammell, you are tied to this grand
Yeah.
body of data and information, and your sense of security was really significantly improved. I mean, this idea of being on your own, it's just like it's the very what
Exactly.
DNA of the modernist world.
Right from the
Nobody was
beginning.
on
Yeah.
their own. Nobody was ever on their own. But Gammell gave you that kind of a mooring, a
He
rationale.
gave you a logical way of working,
Yeah,
an orderly
yeah,
fashion, but most of all, an orderly way of thinking
yeah,
and solving problems.
yeah.
So
Well,
that
but
exactly,
connected to the
yeah,
great past.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I can't tell you how many times I remember, going to his studio at 4 o'clock, at the end of the day, 4 or 5 o'clock, and sitting with him for an hour, going over the old exhibition catalogs,
yeah, yeah.
studying design, composition, getting his opinion as to why this painter was a good painter, why Redfield might have been a good landscape painter, but in the long term, in the whole scheme of things, didn't measure up to a Metcalf or anyone of the Barbizon school. It was just fascinating to get his opinion on
Yeah.
a constant basis of what was good, why was it good,
Mhm.
what was bad, why was it bad.
Sure. Yeah, that's not a thing that you saw in that in New York. And I'm not trying to take anybody away down
No,
in the New York world.
I
I'm just in the commendation model, trying to say what Gamble was. You have to realize what you weren't getting, and
mhm,
there was this. For among other things, Gamble did this thing that now has become this big fad called the atelier thing. But his idea was taking personal responsibility for painters, you know,
mhm,
and for their futures and that sort of thing. That was not a thing in New York. That's why I said everybody was on his own. You just, good luck with that. And in fact, always got the sense it would be a dog eat dog world, and it's good luck if you can do well. But I'm not going
right,
to make you better than me. I mean, I don't mean to say that anybody ever said that, and I don't think most of them even thought it, but it felt like
right.
that. And it did not feel like with Gamble, you felt like he was going to give you what he had, and he really hoped for the best for you.
He did. I mean, what's kind of funny is, and I think it was in the case of people who just didn't have the experience or maturity.
Right.
But you remember there was always this. There were a certain number of people who were unhappy with Mr. Gammell and always felt he was holding them back. But they
And
never realized their own limitations that was holding him back, not him. I mean, he was open to pursuing any interest that you wanted.
yeah, I
Um,
never saw that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I know I've told the story before, and you've heard it, but when we were in Williamstown, we were itching to work with the model out of
right.
doors. Kept asking him, "Can we have a model out of doors?" And he said, "No, no, none of you are ready. None of you are ready." And then one Sunday, we hired a model on our own, and he looks out the window and comes running out and puts his smock on and starts criticizing us all as if he had, hired the model for us.
Yeah, yeah. We've talked about various aspects of that. I've had the same experience personally with his, but some of the guys right around us were saying, "Don't do that. He won't let you. He won't want you. He won't." And it just was never true. In fact, there was a kind of an excitement, maybe a
He would,
curiosity about you. Even who knows what it was, but he was
yeah,
he was like so there
yeah.
for whatever
He
you
was,
were inclined to do. But there was some expectation that you wouldn't be there very long if you weren't actually drawing a cast with some kind of accuracy and learning how to model form. I mean, like, but what would you expect? Who's holding you back from what? But I was empowered by every single word of his mouth. I mean, that's all I can tell you at this point.
it's interesting. I was talking to someone this week. They came up with a phrase
Mm.
to describe something I think happens to students. They reach a point, they're so intent on getting it right and
Uh,
not making a mistake that they hit a point of self resistance.
mhm,
Where
mhm.
they can't move forward because they're so concerned with, it might be handling the charcoal, modeling, and they stop looking and seeing because they're so concerned with the technique or not making a mistake
Yeah,
or
yeah,
not really jumping into the fire and addressing the issues that need to be addressed. They're always hovering around going in for the kill
Well,
and make.
what do you mean by that?
I see it in students from time to time. They, it's almost, it's the case of, I'm sure you've had it. You have a student who's, they're working on the background too long, and they're not, jumping into,
Oh
really
yeah,
seeing, because they're scared. They don't want to make a mistake. They're hesitant to, progress, so they work around, the non-essential things, becoming very good at them. Sharpening their charcoal or.
no. I got the basic message there, Tom. But you're talking about you. Then said they just want to be jumping right in. What is? Did you mean?
No, they're not jumping in.
Oh, not jumping in. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Of course. But get that back to Gammell. I mean, did you have direct conversation with Gammell on behalf of yourself, for example, when you were not? I mean, I remember last time we spoke, you said something that I said to myself, I got to have to deal with him on this because you said not having your shapes correct. And I said, that's Gammell would say, this isn't a matter of right and wrong. It's not a matter of correct. And he would say it explicitly like that. It's not a question of, but it was like there was this, with his world, I never saw that there was going to be any chance that you'd be in terror. But I think Gammell, by his coming into the room and correcting your work, as it were, showing you where something was a little bit off and getting you into the mindset of the backstraggler,
Right.
I think that did terrify people. You never really saw that in New York. It was all about, I see what you're doing,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I remember many times coming in, and some people might describe it as him wrecking your painting.
Yes,
I mean,
that's true.
Obliterating everything, just wiping it out, and not necessarily correcting it perfectly,
Right.
but just pushing you in that direction. And most oftentimes, that's all a student really needs is to know that if like the quote from Paxton, if did you have fun doing it the first time? It should be twice as much fun the second time.
Sure.
I think the hesitancy with students is sometimes to not be daring, not to wipe something out and then just simply do it all over again. And I found that was the most valuable thing. And with his criticisms was he would break it down, whether it was a landscape. I mean, he would just wipe it out. And his correction, might not be perfect. It might be entirely wrong, but he just got you thinking in terms of, make big corrections, big, broad. And if you do that and you're not worried about the outcome, you will simply get better because your handling will improve, your ability to see color. But if you are being too careful and trying to match your color on the palette and put that on the canvas as your final note, you'll never advance.
I don't remember, by the way, Gammell being wrong, and I was paying attention to it because I thought this guy's got 80-year-old eyes. I mean, and it looked like he had cataracts on him. And I'm thinking to myself, smartly, I got to be concerned about this. Does he really? I've had students, and even when I had young eyes, I remember students. Oh, don't we all see differently? And they'd go on to a number of different things where they would justify correcting or not buying the correction that you were offering them. But Gammell's correction of your note was always a principle-based correction. It wasn't a fix this note correction. It was, don't you see what I'm talking about? Don't you see the larger idea?
Right.
And so when he wiped out the head, he was not wiping out your head. He was bringing it into a broader, and bringing the breadth back, and then telling you to now you could put the eyes back in again, but you got to do it in the unity of the skull, or whatever. So yeah.
You can't do it piecemeal, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Was the simple fact that he came in and wiped it out and then started to paint it back in, because your picture is only going to have unity if the paint is flowing and you're flowing mass into mass, adjacent masses.
Right.
You're not going to have unity if you're picking at it in a piecemeal manner.
Oh, we all tried to get it, didn't we? You tried to get that big form by painting in between the nose and the eye.
Right.
It's true.
Just coming in and massing up the whole head, with a general broad note, and then going in with the darks and the lights, and then leaving the middle tones till last.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Well, one of the things you bring up is his tendency to be aphoristic, though, and we've talked about that briefly before, but the remember how much fun it was the last time. He seems to have collected everything anybody said or whatever, and he would typically attribute them to the source.
Mm.
Although I
He
have to
was
say that several of us have, through Gammell's mouth, received the same information from different sources. You know what I mean? So I got Tarbell saying one thing, and you got DeCamp saying that. You know what I mean? So and I don't mind. I don't care.
yeah,
That's not one of those things I'm too cautious about. But Gammell was pretty. He did want you to have the statement correct, have the sentence pretty well in hand.
hmm
And of course, I was one of these guys who wanted the concept more than I wanted the expression. But he was very sharp to correct that. To say,
right.
I meant exactly what I said. And aphorisms that come down through time, he would make a bold point of that, and then he would. But he had one, Johnny on the spot, just one for every occasion.
I believe he came to the studio when he came in every morning to give us our criticism. I believe that he had thought about it from the previous day, and
Yeah,
he came in a specific point that he wanted to get across, and he was ready with the aphorisms. And sometimes because of the previous day and the criticism he gave then, he was fixed on what he wanted to tell you the next day, and it might have been a situation where you didn't necessarily need that, but
yeah,
that was going to be the lesson for today. You
yeah.
know, we're working this out, but
Well, I
you know,
never, I don't know that he would have needed to, though. And I mean, I'm just talking about as a teacher myself. I have found that whatever a guy's dealing with, you see it on the spot. You know the three aphorisms that apply to it, and I'm always wanting to have the voice of the past out there in front of students as much as my own ideas.
yeah,
It's a thing you have to value both. The student's only got you, and he really needs you, and he needs what
right.
you think and what your work actually looks like, and all that sort of thing. But I have found, and I didn't conclude that with you, but you might be right. I'm not going to argue that for a second, that he might have come in. And I would
No,
say there were times when he knew, like you're doing a pencil drawing, he knew what things you needed to know. There's no
oh,
question about that.
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But I mean, more often than not, it was simply shape, value, color.
Well, duh, would you say?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's and a little more like, and a little more
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
The great Bona quote.
yeah. Make it as like as you can.
Yeah,
And then make
make
it more like. Yeah,
things.
that word "like" is a cool one. You know, um,
It,
it's just an amazing word. How apropos that thing actually is. I don't know what the word is in French, but in English, boy, it's a superb word. Yeah,
it is. Well, plus it takes it out of the today's painters are, the realist painters are so concerned with detail
hmm
uh, that like is a wonderful word because it's so broad and it's so general, and it
yeah, yeah.
just represents the truth of the entire subject.
Yeah, today's particularly the one thing, and this would be a fun thing probably to investigate a little bit with you and I. But I remember Gammell was working on a site-size basis and doing this tons and tons of measuring, and I would say pre-measuring. And I had an enormous resistance to it, and ultimately decided. I said, Mr. Gammell, when does this measuring stuff stop? He said, the cure for measuring is more measuring. I mean, I think he thought I was a complete rebel or something like that. But the point is, what I gleaned though from it over time, because you have to read all the rest of his stuff, was people take today that measuring means making this match that over there. And
Hmm
he writes, in fact, in so many words in his book, and he said it in so many words, that learning to see is learning to see the relationships between things, not to transfer things over onto another canvas from over here, matching color over to here, matching.
Right.
Is that your sense of? Is that your?
I,
Did you come away with
I,
that? Yeah, yeah,
it's all relations.
yeah, yeah.
Getting things in proper relation.
Right,
The size of it may be wrong, but if you have the proper relation,
right.
you're perfectly fine. I mean,
Well,
that's
how
what.
can the size of it be wrong though? Because the only thing that's right is the relation.
Well, just depending on the scale you're working on. yeah,
Well, no, but if you're saying you're trying to make something life size or something like that, and you
right,
make it match, but it doesn't match anything in the painting, what
right.
is that?
And,
Yeah,
and-
yeah,
and you can tell if it's correct.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, fire is so sensitive as a measuring device. You can tell
yeah,
if it's
yeah,
you know accurate in terms of being life size or not.
yeah,
If you made it too small, it's going to feel too small.
yeah.
We have that ability to judge.
Well, when you look at the whole, of course, yeah, which is again that would take you back to the Reynolds discourses that Gammell would also lean on you to read early. Genius was a chapter. I tell students that they'll be in chapter 11 if they don't read it. But genius lies in seeing the thing as a whole. Interesting watching Reynolds' personal evolution, by the way, through that book. It's very funny, the difference between the
Mm-hmm.
early guy and the late guy, but that's a whole
Mm-hmm.
different story. Oh,
No, the discourses are incredibly valuable. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
a book, and one can't read it enough.
yeah.
Should always keep a copy open in your studio and refer to it.
Yeah. I didn't get, I gotta throw this out because it's a conversation. I didn't get as much of Hunt's talks on art out of Gammell as you did.
Yeah,
You seem to have had this enormous, I don't know if Gammell was reading it at the time. I know that can happen to a teacher that you happen to be reading it at the time,
I
but
think
he did not
yeah.
lean on Hunt. In fact, I remember making disparaging comments about a couple, and there are really some things in there that are that are that are flat arguable. You know what I mean? Put it that way.
Oh,
But
right.
I'm very interested
Well,
in what you were saying because I didn't get that out of him. I didn't get him saying, read Hunt, read Hunt, read
no,
Hunt. Yeah,
I remember talking to him, about it, quite often. He had the copy in, the Sideways book. He
right.
had a copy in the studio. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Not every quote is relevant or even seems useful.
Yeah,
Uh, I mean, everything is taken out of context. You remember when we first started studying with him, he gave us a little pad of paper and said to write down everything I say. I mean, that's I think where he got the idea from. Helen Knowlton, who comprised that volume of all the quotes, she just wrote down quotes, anything Hunt said on a scrap of paper, and then later compiled it into book form.
yeah,
Uh, and I mean, most of it is very useful. I
yeah,
mean, life as well as painting.
yeah.
But yeah, there are things out there that are out there that don't
No, I didn't mean to
don't.
do that to him. I'm only saying that my experience with Gammell was he wasn't heavily into quoting Hunt, even though there
Yeah,
are some very obvious ones, and I've forgotten them at this moment
yeah.
that one could use on an everyday basis. Yeah.
Well, I think my memory comes from, and you probably went. Do you remember when we went to see the great Lemuel Shaw portrait out in Worcester by Hunt? I think he was probably reading.
That was five
You know,
minutes before I got there, Tom. I love that picture, though. I love that portrait. Yeah, yeah,
magnificent. So he was thoroughly interested in Hunt at the time. I mean, really a great portrait.
yeah,
Well worth seeing. I
yeah,
mean, I would recommend any students interested in portraiture to go see it. It's grand on a Alaska type scale.
yeah, yeah. No, I think I do remember him saying that he considered it one of the great American portraits.
Yeah,
I put the portrait of the judge by Tarbell up in that class of
that
rarefied air. Yeah,
that that's the supreme example of the best of American portrait painting. That and Theodore Roosevelt by Joseph DeCamp.
yeah,
Uh, Extraordinary.
yeah. The Roosevelt strikes me as more perfunctory, and I hate to say it, like it lacks the magic that judge does. But it's an absolutely, as it were, perfect painting from the point of view of skill levels and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's beautiful in every way. But I wish I had. I've never seen that one in person, so it's much harder to make a judgment about it. But the other ones are obviously.
Well, the judge has something about it. I mean, the magic, the truth, the beauty,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
which is you don't usually associate with that type of male portrait.
yeah.
It's really quite grand.
I was looking at it online, one of my videos recently, side by side with uh, oh golly, another major portrait painter. And he
Did you get
just,
it?
yeah.
Did you get a chance to see it in person with him?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
When,
When it was in
when,
the it was in the restorers, yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
But we went to the courthouse one time to see it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we probably 3 or 4 times. It was magnificent.
You know, one of the conversations that was characteristic of Gammell, though, was this, you know, the character, yeah, conversations was the restorer discussion and what restorers do to pictures. And we saw, and I don't want to go negative, but we saw a number of those things. But because, thanks to Gammell's experience, I had this opportunity to have the portrait of a guy named Conrad, Pastor Conrad, and somebody I belonged to this church that owned the portrait, and so I offered to they were talking about having it cleaned. Have what's that?
Was that
Yeah,
Park Street?
Park Street Church.
Yeah,
Yeah, have you seen it?
I did. I remember
Yeah.
seeing it. You know,
So I took it over on their behalf. I took it over to Oliver
all
Brothers, and which was Gammel's favorite place when the old day, you know, from the old experiences.
sure.
And immediately, the gentleman standing there, who I'm not going to name, said, "Well, we'll have to do something about that hand." But now that immediately evokes every conversation we had with Gammell, who was showing you, and I saw it as a 17-year-old kid. I saw them ruin a Bugro in Denver. There's no question they ruined it. Red lines where the toes used to be. I mean, like it was
Right.
like ungodly ruined,
Right.
and then they patched it up in a very inadequate way. But what was I going to say? And we saw that happen to the portrait of the Horatio, who was the the British or the American general by not by Reynolds. Who's our guy? Copley, not Copley, the other guy.
Well, the Degar and the MFA, the Duke and
Yeah,
Duchess of.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So we saw that repeatedly, and Gammell would drag us up to it and rub our nose in it. So I remember my instinct was to just walk away, just politely thank him so very much, and all that sort of stuff. And then I took it to my studio and I cleaned it very gently with very very faint, soap and
sure.
water, and it would look stunning. And the hand was perfect, of course, but but it was like we wanted the hand to come out instead of stay in the shadows, you know. And imagine
Right.
what somebody like that would do to the judge. Anyway, but that was I'm saying that to talk about Gammell's solid awareness of the damage being done to pictures in our time, in his time,
You,
noticeably
you,
in his time.
you do remember his favorite quote about picture restorers? More paint has been destroyed in the history of art by bad restoration than all the wars in history combined.
What I hadn't heard before. Although I worked for a restorer, Tom, who said he studied in at the museum school, and he said his teacher's favorite line was, they come in roses and they go out orchids," or whatever, the other way around.
But I know we've talked. I think we've talked about it before, but the Vermeer at the Gardner Museum,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
eventually destroyed uh, probably 15, 20 years before it was stolen.
yeah, yeah.
The restorer who just hatcheted the picture and
Mhm.
completely removed all the paint from the waist down of the figure on the right and added a hem with the spotted tiger. They added like a cougar hem on the bottom. I mean, it was just dreadful what they did.
So
Um,
knowledge, even from Gammel's knowledge, can make your life very miserable.
yeah.
To know those things, I mean, oh my golly.
And the interesting thing is that this in the Gardner Museum, it must still be there, but there's correspondence between him and the director, Roland Van Hadley, who was a friend of his at the time,
Right.
him complaining about the over restoration of the picture and
After the
really,
fact.
after the fact.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I'm sure,
he did the same thing with the Sargent mural restoration,
right.
and it's amazing. It's just amazing that, and
Masterpiece Dishonored.
yeah, yeah, and that's something, by the way, I can make available to you out there if you're interested in hearing Gammel's conversation about that. It's really a sort of a summary of the kind of things that can go on, and the hubris sometimes involved. I mean, I just let the picture rot. Just let her rot. And it might be a different situation in the case of, for example, The Last Supper, where it's literally falling off the wall. You might find some strategies to keep it on the wall, but this isn't what was happening. I mean, pictures don't go that bad in what was it,
No,
25 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it was. I mean, like, what
in
are they thinking? Yeah.
in a completely isolated environment.
Yeah. No.
Just,
No. It couldn't have
I
been
mean,
a nicer environment for that picture
no,
or
exactly.
that
I
mural.
mean,
Yeah.
just proper removal of the dirt and dust.
Yeah.
That's all necessary. But restorers oftentimes, they think that they're there to improve the picture.
Mm. Well,
Unfortunately,
yeah, yeah, and curators are using lighting to improve the pictures as well. I mean, but we could go there. But one of the other things that happened in Gammell's lifetime was the repainting of the color of the walls around the other Sargent murals over at the Museum of Fine Art,
hmm
and could totally reckon the unity of the painting. Somebody with their great wisdom, whoever I don't know, it could have been. I mean, the crazy thing was that Sargent mural was done also with the architect involved.
hmm
So who is the great wit, that suddenly decided something, But there are way too many deciders out there, this is making calamity out of our
well,
form.
they just didn't understand, Sargent's mind and what his intent was.
Yeah, yeah,
They think that according to modern standards and the general use of artificial lighting, that they could improve it. I mean, it's just very unfortunate.
yeah, yeah,
Not, his original intent.
yeah. But Gammell put a fair amount of time into writing about those sorts of things and other things as well. I don't know how many. Was there about 40 essays out there, maybe some number like that, Tom?
Yeah,
Um,
I have a collection of them.
yeah,
I read them all the time. I have my students read them. I mean, they're
yeah.
wonderful.
One,
Most of them are unpublished.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah. Well, one of them is New Deal in Art,
hmm
and where he's talking about what museums do, what they were doing to send the academics into the dust heap of history. And his writing, well-connected conversation really starts a train of thought that should have been picked up by scholars.
Right.
It's still out there. It's still out there, and
Well,
it's really big
what,
reading.
what's fascinating is he picks up on the fact that Harvard, set out in the late 20s, and especially the early 30s, to really take over the museum world. They started that program to train museum curators.
Right.
And prior to that, curators evolved naturally from people in the field.
Mhm.
Whether they were painters,
Yeah.
themselves who understood what was going on.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, by 1930, we have a degree program in
Yeah.
museum direction,
Yeah.
and they essentially today control most of the museums in the world,
Yeah. Yeah.
or at
Well,
least in the
and that's directly from the horse's mouth. That guy was an insider. He had personal conversations with guys right in the game, right in the middle of this whole thing. He was a member of the same club with these people, so casual
right.
conversations and formal ones as well.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
but that's again, that's some demonstration of his connectedness and his awareness, of the world at large. That has more, what's the right word, more gravitas. Than
hmm
some you or I coming out of no background at all and not knowing the who's and the who's.
Right. Well, just the fact that in the 1950s, he had he curated two exhibitions of Bunker's work
Yeah,
at the museum.
yeah,
One might have been in the 40s and one in the early 50s. But just the fact that the museum allowed him to do that
yes,
uh, shows that they hadn't, developed complete control over the museum.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
today, I mean, if you or I, approached the museum and wanted to curate a show, we'd be laughed at.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, no
But
question.
just,
Yeah, where's your piece of paper?
that's right.
Gammell actually did say at one point. He said, "I never went to college." He would say that outspokenly. Like I never
Right.
went to college. It's a very funny thing that people have done that to us, to this generation. The the country, the world has become the laughingstock because of those guys who went to college. I mean, this is an outrageous world we're living in right this moment. Every
They've
single one of
ruined
these guys went to have high degrees.
they ruined our world.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what is that? What's really going on with that? But that's another story. But it's part of that conversation. Tom, we have maybe just a couple more minutes.
Sure.
I'm thinking we should pick up on this. We've barely covered the sort of the rough idea of who Gammell was. I wonder if there's any other, if maybe some last passing thought for today.
One thing I noticed in the comments, one of your viewers, made an inquiry about the hierarchy of the Gammell Studios and how it functioned and what role Bob Hunter played. The older students, which is always kind of interesting. It was really it was less organized than I think a lot of people think it might have been. It was simply who came on the scene and showed great promise as a student. But it was interesting how you became a student, and we all came various ways. And you've told your story about all of us meeting you in New York and encouraging you to come up because we thought you'd be a good fit. But Bob Hunter, just to answer that question specifically, what role he played, he was a student in the 50s and became very close to Mr. Gammell. So in the 50s and 60s. So later on, when our generation came on the scene, I remember him referring to himself as the Mad Hatter, as in Alice in Wonderland. He was actually sort of the one who screened a lot of people. If
Right.
Bob, because he was very close to him personally, especially being married to Liz, who was his goddaughter.
Right.
He wanted to make sure students were compatible and would not cause problems within the studio, which would distress everybody. But Bob Hunter, he was constantly on the lookout, for prospective students, who he felt would be a good. And he would get a lot of those people from Vesper George, where he actually taught also.
Yeah.
And
But you brought up this hierarchy question though, and you didn't quite treat it like that just in that conversation. You went into Bob, and that's a big deal. But tell me what you meant by it, because I know David, for example, really did. He was even making small paintings that suggested something like people trying to get up to the throne of Gammell.
I don't only use that word hierarchy, referring to your viewer's question, about the older students and what role they played.
Yeah, yeah,
But I didn't sense a hierarchy.
no, I didn't either. That's what I wanted you to make sure this guy didn't walk away.
Yeah.
I think the Lack world over there has that belief, maybe coming from Lack or some of those guys from that generation that we know created a lot of seeds of dissension and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, one of our guys, David, I think, referred to himself as claimed that he referred to himself as Machiavellian, which is
David Love.
yeah, well, yeah, David,
Yeah.
well, yeah. I didn't want to bring David fully into this unless he wants to be in. So, but yes, yeah.
Well, I think David was he. I don't think David was Machiavellian.
No.
But
No, he would say things like that. He did that one painting where he shows some guy trying to get up and the other guy up there with his paintbrush trying to knock him off the stand. And the Gammell and his little throne above all that stuff. So, I can understand people having something of an idea like that, but I never saw the least inkling of it. And I was the last guy in the room, so to speak,
Yeah, no, and our generation got along extremely well.
Yes,
I mean, we kept any of the, if there was any inkling in that direction, we kept it under control. And
yeah.
I think Mr. Gammell was most happy when he had serious students who really were eager to learn and get as much out of him as possible.
Yeah.
I think that I also think what you just said, the Lack world out in Minneapolis, looking back at Boston from afar, probably imagined a lot of things
Right.
that actually didn't go on. And they had this perception that there was a hierarchy or Mr. Gammell. Yeah, I'm always mystified by, people who used to, think that Mr. Gammell was holding them back. And I think that's what part of, certain people are going to be given secret knowledge and, allowed to advance. And no, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, if you worked hard and advanced, you advanced.
Yeah, Gammell had the information I needed as soon as I needed it constantly. I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything.
Yeah.
I would have to been living in my head to even think what that thing would have been that he must not be
Right.
giving me. I mean, but the fact is, if you didn't pursue him, I mean, there are other people, you and among others, I mean, didn't pursue Gammell on the subject of imaginative paintings. I did. I mean, I did. But so what? He wasn't
Yeah.
picking me out and saying Paul's
Right.
advanced and therefore he gets to, you know, who
Yeah.
makes that kind of stuff up?
I mean,
He just
David,
was doing it as a good teacher, following what your personal
sure.
predilections were.
Yeah. I mean, David Curtis flirted with it for a while. He showed some interest and then,
Yeah.
Turned completely to landscape. I mean, that was the natural progression of things. Well, you remember his favorite catchphrase was, follow your nose.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, the one area in which he was not like that was in the being realistic about how to make a living at your career. And so if you weren't coming for money, he would say it's a rich man's sport to make imaginative pictures. And he said that specifically to me. And
yeah.
he would try to, and he worked to get me some portraits. I mean, literally in the process,
Mhm.
he made contacts with two or three people, some big names,
Yeah.
And I thought, man, am I ready for this? I mean, like really? And between us, we did commendable work on those projects.
Sure.
But he was he was saying, and he would say it in specific words. Look, you don't have backing. Portraits and commissioned works are a way
Right.
to make you survive. And if you're lucky, you might be able to do something more than that.
Exactly.
And
Right.
but that was a real thing, and that wasn't a question of and he would definitely not tell you to do portraits if he didn't feel you had a natural capacity to do it. He would say you're not made for that if that was the case. No, and he would encourage you in whatever your interest was, but it also say, look, it's probably not going to be this for you. It'll be that. Think about it. And nobody, I don't remember him saying it like, I have a guy for that already. Go
Right.
back to the bottom of the hill.
You're
Anyway,
absolutely right. Yeah.
let's dismiss
No,
that idea. Yeah.
exactly. No, he was ready to help you on whatever you were interested in and encourage you and, show you what he knew.
Yeah. Yeah. He was always there. I never had him. And it was in our minds to believe it because the people just around us, some people had been just leaving and they were saying, he'll hold you back. He'll do this. So you're naturally watching for something like that.
Right. Right.
Everything he did made my world better every time he said a word, everything out of his mouth. Either he couldn't help himself, and all he had to say was what he was full of, which was good knowledge. And so what if that's the case?
Yeah.
It had no effect that I can see. And I'd be the worst kind of judgmental person to say it
Exactly.
did. Where would I? I'm not smart enough to know
Yeah.
that. And
No,
looking back, I would say it's flat out silly.
yeah.
He didn't hold anybody
Exactly.
back that I ever saw, ever.
No, I know. I never ever saw any
Yeah,
evidence at all. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, he was the most dedicated teacher, I've ever witnessed. I
He
mean,
loved
just he threw himself into it 100%.
he loved everything about his painting. There was no indication that he didn't love you. I mean,
Yeah.
he wasn't sort of coming in the room with his nose plugged up in case smell some little plebes or something.
Right.
It was nothing. The guy he loved everything about the field, including the student and his progress.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And incredibly generous with this.
always giving.
Everything he could give, he gave 100%.
Yeah, it's precisely. We couldn't agree more totally, and it's a good note to end on too, probably, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Excellent.
We'll see what we'll pick up in the next one. Maybe you and I can talk a bit after this one
Yeah.
and see if we can.
And
I don't mind if it's just going naturally because we sort of know. We've already covered a couple of things that we've
I
covered before.
encourage any of your listeners viewers to make a list of things that, specific things they'd like to hear more about.
Yeah, yeah, please do. I mean, I was glad of that statement there to have a chance to actually address that, the idea
Yeah.
of ranking and best and this kind of stuff.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me, by the way, Gammell being from the world he's from, it wouldn't surprise me if he got a student, I could name a couple, who came in with that baggage and set themselves up. You know what I mean? And believed in it, because
Right.
then you can excuse your own work. You can say it's not because my work is failing. I'm not getting information. I'm at the low level of whatever.
I, and I now I understand your policy of not naming names, but
But
I, I do remember one student coming in and telling us, the regular people, that he understood Mr. Gamble in a way that we didn't because he was from that class.
yeah,
that was that was sort of laughable
yeah. No, I
because
know, I know.
actually in the long run he didn't understand them.
Well, the thing is, what is it that we needed to understand? We were getting
Right.
what we came for. We lived in a place that said we want to be painters. You have the data, and he delivered it like going to a candy store and buying candy.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nothing
Exactly.
go. If there was something going on, I'm glad I'm not a part of that class because I'm glad to have missed it,
Exactly.
despite
Well,
the nightmare I had when I 2 nights ago.
the great gift that he gave us was the best life possible.
Yeah,
We're all doing what we want to do, and we're sharing it with others.
yeah, but he got you fully into what it really is, in its long history and its significant practices, his best practices. I mean, like, it's not like he's the perfect this or that or anything. He just was connected to that world, and it was
Right.
fusing the knowledge. It just poured
And
out of him. Yeah,
he really did, I believe, gave us an understanding of what those previous generations of painters were like, what their makeup was like, what their attitudes were.
yeah, in a big picture way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Um, Completely contrary to the modern day view of what an artist is.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a real benefit. That's a huge benefit, isn't it?
These men were workmen. These men and women, they were workmen. They worked tirelessly at their craft.
And Gammell talked that way. He didn't
Yeah,
talk like, as much as he's from some elite background, he wasn't talking these aesthetic,
yeah,
fantasy, live in a world of
yeah.
your head. He was everything was about
I
it
I
right
remember
there on the canvas, right there.
I remember him talking about Paxton. He would bring his lunch every day in a lunch pail,
Yes.
and he would go out and he would sit, with the construction workers down the street who were building a building, and he would have lunch with them.
Wow. I hadn't
You know,
heard that one.
yeah,
That's
from
that's the
12.
fun of being here with you. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom,
But
thank you. Yeah, yeah, yep.
yeah,
Yeah, you
but
can end this on. Yeah,
they weren't elites. They were workmen.
yeah, yeah. I think he loved being in that class. I did have a student once who I made a snide comment, and I thought I was being funny, and it was someone with a nice background too. And I realized I'd really hurt that person, but her comment to me was, "I really just want to be like you guys." And well, what it is, we're all as humans, as humans, we all want to make something and to make something of
Yeah,
value and want to do it better. And this whole idea that this class thing, I'll tell you what, I think it hurts the guys in the class more than it hurts the guys outside of it, judged based on that judgment that this person introduced me to.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I felt horrible after being that guy. And I didn't do it consciously or purposely. It must be something in my low life that inclined me to do it. But anyway, hey Tom, this has been a riot. Yeah, we haven't
Well,
even begun talking about Gamble yet.
yeah,
So we'll try to do this in a couple more for you guys out there who are have any continuing interest. And I know I've had very positive responses. But do as Tom says and throw something at him, at me, at us, and on any level, from practical to personal, it's all fine. We're just gonna give you our impressions, and if Tom and I don't happen to exactly agree, I think mostly we will. But if we
yeah,
don't, it'll be more fun in the conversation. So
certainly will.
yeah,
Excellent.
Tom, let me
Great.
just thank my people here: Anthony R, Adra B, Lucas, and Benjamin C. Lucas C. and Benjamin C. Not the same family, for your contributions this last time. Very much appreciated. All right, you guys keep on subscribing, keep on sharing. I think we're up to 1 million views actually, total views now. That's a serious number. I like that. And sometimes we're getting as many as 15,000 views on one subject. Within a week or so. So we have our good days, and so it's really kind of nice milestone stuff, and I like the idea of actually celebrating Gammell because of it. Maybe that's our way of saying this is a milestone. And let's plan on doing it again.
Certainly. I, I'm waiting.
This
Excellent.
has been a lot of fun. We're gonna live our childhoods over again.
Thanks again, Paul.
Yeah, Tom.
Okay. Bye.
See you next time.